Hi guys, Pete the Wargamer here, back with another painting tutorial. In this video, we'll be focusing on some Colonial Militia from the American War of Independence from Warlord Games' Black Powder range. Now before we go on, if you wanted to try out the techniques in this tutorial, Wargames Illustrated are giving away a free Colonial Militia sprue in its May edition, which you can paint in the colours and techniques that I'll be using in this video. Before we start painting, we first of all need to apply a primer, so the later layers of paint adhere to the miniature's surface. It doesn't matter too much which colour you go for, but I have opted to use a grey airbrush primer to help paint the various midtones of the miniature. I like to paint my miniatures by applying all of the base coats first, but before I apply them, I like to thin them down with a little water. The paint I'm using for this step is skeleton bone, so mix it with your water in roughly equal quantities, which will make the paint easier to work with. With your thinned skeleton bone, you can then apply this paint to the breeches of your Colonial Militiamen. Apply your first coat, then after allowing it to dry, apply a second coat over the top. This layering technique will ensure you have a good, smooth base colour to build upon with your washes and highlights. Using the same thinning and base coating method as before, I'll next be tackling the jacket using some army green. For the coat and also the sling on the rifle, I'll be adding a base coat of leather brown. You'll notice over the last few steps I've painted the inner areas first and have worked my way outwards. This technique helps to reduce the risk of overspilling onto areas that you've already painted when you're trying to paint those harder to reach parts. Next up, we'll be painting the dark brown leather and wooden areas of the model. These include the straps on the satchel and as well as the rifle stock itself. To achieve that reddish brown coloration, I'll be using some dirt spatter. For the stockings and the strap holding the satchel, we want to create a slightly off-white colour, therefore I'll be using some Spaceship Exterior. As this paint is quite light, you may find that applying an extra layer over the top will help give you that smooth base coat. To paint the face and hands, we want to start things off with a base coat of Kobold Skin. Next, we will be painting the areas of black leather and fabric, as well as any areas of black and steel. These areas include the cap, the shoes, and also the metal on the rifle. We'll be painting all of these areas with Necromancer Cloak. Even though the areas we're painting are black, using the very dark grey of Necromancer Cloak will allow us to benefit from the shading properties of washes later on, something that a pure black wouldn't. Finally, we want to base coat the areas of brighter metal, the sword in the case of this miniature, using some gunmetal. After finishing this step, make sure that you thoroughly clean out your brushes and change your paint water to prevent any cross-contamination of metallic specks into your other paints. With our base coats completed, we next want to apply a wash of soft tone, but before we do so, we'll need to again thin it down. This is because applying it straight from the bottle would be much too strong. However, instead of using water, this time I'll be mixing in some of the Army Painter's Quick Shade Mixing Medium in equal parts wash to medium. The medium works by reducing the amount of pigment in the wash without changing its consistency. I find that this results in a much smoother and more subtle result than mixing in with water. However, if you don't have access to this medium, you could instead use distilled water. With your thinned soft tone, you now want to apply this wash to the areas that we painted with skeleton bone earlier. The wash will flow into the recesses, creating shading which will improve the level of detail on the model. Using the same technique as in the last step, you'll next want to apply a wash of strong tone over the brown and green areas of the model. The darker pigmentation of this wash will help to create shadows over the darker parts. Next, I'll be using some dark tone over the parts of the model that were painted with Necromancer Cloak and gunmetal. This wash will really help to bring out the details in these very dark and metallic areas. If you mix in a little more quick shade mixing medium with your dark tone, you can also apply this over the areas that we painted with Spaceship Exterior to add some subtle shading. The final wash to apply is to the skin, and for this we'll be using the aptly named Flesh Wash. Now that we've completed the washes, we can begin working on the highlights to help emphasize some details of the model. To do this, lightly drag the tip of a thin brush along the raised edges. This will create a small line of lighter paint along these raised areas, helping to improve both depth and definition. We'll start off by highlighting the model in the same order that we base coated. Therefore, we'll be using some drake tooth over the breeches to pick out the folds in the cloth. By thinning down the paint with just a little water, we should make this task much easier, as the flow of paint should be much smoother than if you'd used it straight from the bottle. For the green jacket, we will next be applying a highlight of Scaly Hide along the edges. Next, we want to apply a highlight to the brown coat and rifle sling on the militiaman. Using some monster brown, carefully pick out the folds in the coat around the arms, cuffs, and those hanging below the waist. To maintain the reddish-brown colour of dirt spatter, I would suggest highlighting the edges of the rifle, satchel, and straps using some fur brown. As we use the off-white Spaceship Exterior to base coat the white areas, we are next able to highlight their edges using some matte white. For the flesh areas, we'll be picking out the facial features and fingers using some corpse pale. To finish off the black cloth and the leather areas of the model, apply a very thin edge highlight of Spaceship Exterior. The final highlight to apply is one of plate mail metal. This highlight will be focused along the edges of the metal areas. These include both the pure metal saber and the blackened steel of the rifle. And here we have the completed Colonial Militiaman. I finished things off with a simple basing scheme using some textured paints and grass tufts. As I mentioned before, you will find Colonial Militia sprue in the May edition of Wargames Illustrated, so keep an eye out for that magazine in your newsagents if you would like to try out any of these techniques. You can find a full list of all the paints that I've used in this tutorial in the description below, along with any other equipment that I've used to create this video. If you enjoyed this video, do let me know in the comments below, and if you haven't done so already, be sure to check out my Patreon page if you'd like to support me in making more of these videos. If you have any questions or would just like to chat with others who enjoy my channel, I've set up a Discord server which you can find a link to in the description below. And so, the only thing left to say is, thanks for watching, and goodbye.